There you go. Thanks, Lindsay. So good afternoon. I'm Lisa Rossi, and I'm excited to welcome you to the very first Electric Vehicle Infrastructure and Interconnection Working Group, or the EVIIWG meeting. I'm looking forward to working with everyone to accomplish the goals of this group. I'd like to first introduce Zerai Hagos to provide some opening remarks. Go ahead, Zerai.
Thanks, Lisa. And as Lisa mentioned, I'm Zerai Hagos, the Deputy Director of the Office of Markets and Innovation here at the Department of Public Service. And I'd also like to welcome you to the first Electric Vehicle Infrastructure Interconnection Working Group meeting, which the Commission created to streamline the interconnection process for EV charging and potentially other forms of new load expected to enter the grid in the coming years. This working group and the reforms to the interconnection process it is tasked with identifying are, of course, part of a larger proceeding with the broad goal of eliminating barriers to the widespread deployment of EV charging across the state. And you can find more information about that proceeding in case 18-E-013 in our department's Document Matter Management System, or DMM. Now, earlier efforts in that proceeding have predominantly focused on the economic barriers to EV charging, and the Commission has already authorized over $1.5 billion in programs and incentives to help offset the upfront costs of the make-ready infrastructure for the EV charging, as well as beneficial rate designs and managed charging programs to pair grid-benefiting charging behavior with customer-friendly savings opportunities. The Commission funding adds to the overall statewide support for EV charging that totals over $2.7 billion as of today across all agencies. Now, the Commission's leadership in the development of EV charging policies and work of the many parties attending today's meeting have been successful in deploying charging infrastructure across the state. Through that earlier success, we've identified some additional barriers where the regulatory policy can further bolster market growth. And that's why a lot of the more recent work of the EV proceedings in the Commission has focused on the grid readiness problems. And when I think about grid readiness, I like to separate them into three time horizons or buckets of projects. One are, identifying locations that are suitable for EV charging right now. The second category would be locations that require some form of site or local upgrades, which can take a year or two. And the third category would be locations that require significant investments in the utility infrastructure. And this could be all the way up to the area station or transmission level of the system. And these upgrades can take upwards of 7 years. So for the first category of projects, the Commission's already developed some helpful solutions to the market, including providing load serving capacity maps, which provides industry participants with information about which locations are reasonable or promising for EV charging and which locations are going to be problematic. For those of you that have the ability to choose which from a number of options in terms of locations for EV charging, this is a really helpful solution to address the immediate term. And of course, the Commission's also working on that third longer term category of charging infrastructure support in case 23-E-0070, where we're developing a proactive planning framework to ensure utility infrastructure is proactively developed so the long lead times of that infrastructure do not present a significant barrier for the deployment of EV charging that we know is needed in the longer term. That said, we think the work of this group can help with that middle category that isn't addressed by those earlier initiatives by the Commission by streamlining the process in which the work is identified and addressed. And I'm particularly excited about this working group format that the Commission has created to address the issue, and that's because we've seen it work here in New York previously. Just under 10 years ago, New York's interconnection queues were experiencing significant backlogs following a surge in interconnection requests from distributed solar projects in 2016. I think we saw over 2,000 applications come in a very short period of time. And that led to a backlog of approximately 1,500 interconnection requests in 2016. Through the work and the collaborative efforts of the Interconnection Policy Working Group and the Interconnection Technical Working Groups, we were able to identify and recommend standardized interconnection processes and a queue management plan that was able to process those applications in a very efficient manner and ultimately eliminate the significant backlogs that had accumulated in 2016. And the working group that we've now created to address these EV interconnection challenges has the same opportunity. We're only going to be able to capitalize on that opportunity if the folks attending this meeting remain engaged and really actively participate. It's an opportunity for us to all roll up our sleeves, get the utilities, the developers, and staff in the same room to identify the most efficient way to process applications to both our incentive programs and interconnection requests. So again, very excited about the opportunity ahead of us, and I think what we do here will really make a difference. So with that, I'm now going to hand the meeting back over to Lisa to get us started with the presentations. But thanks so much for your engagement in this important work.
Thank you so much, Sarai. First, I'll just go over the agenda. Today's agenda includes the purpose and the overview of the EV-IIWG, a presentation of the straw proposal, which was filed on March 15th, 2024 in DMM under case number 18E0138, and there will be a question and answer section followed by next steps. We do have a few housekeeping items to go over, and that is that all attendees will remain muted. Please use the chat or raise hand function if you would like to ask a question or questions. The presentation materials and the recording link will be posted on DMM and on an EV-IIWG webpage. Please email evse@dps.ny.gov for any further questions. And this session is being recorded. So first, I also would like to remind everybody, if you haven't done so already, and that it's to sign up for the EV proceeding, and to sign up for the proceeding, you and to get into the document and matter management or DMM page, follow the instructions that are present on this link, and you can when you sign up, you'll get the notices and updates on the matters in the EV proceedings, and all documents and filings for this working group will be placed in matter number 24-00339 and in case number 18E0138. We will also be placing any materials related to this group specifically on our dedicated webpage. The EV-IIWG webpage will include all the documents related to this working group, such as the straw proposal, the group governance document, and the meeting dates. It will also include other postings, such as meeting recordings, registration links, agendas, and any other relevant information. The address to the webpage is listed at the bottom of this slide. And again, all the slides will be posted so you can get to these links. The objectives of the EV-IIWG were outlined in the Make Ready Program Midpoint Review Order. The EV-IIWG shall address several issues, such as the transparency in the interconnection process, queue backlogs, long wait times, and application development. Our goals are to develop an EV interconnection framework that sufficiently addresses these and any other issues that may be prevalent in the interconnection process. The process developed by the working group, which is us, could also be beneficial for the building sector, as the intake of applications in electrification will likely increase due to the requirements of the CLCPA. One of the group's objectives will be to comment and edit the straw proposal in an effort to create a statewide interconnection process. Once the group's comments and edits are sufficiently addressed, the modified straw proposal will be SAPA'd for additional stakeholder input and comments. The end goal is to develop a statewide approach that streamlines the EV interconnection process. And having said that, I will now turn over the presentation to Catherine to go over the straw proposal that was filed in case 18E0138. Thanks, Catherine.
Hi, everyone. It's nice to see you all on the line today. My name is Catherine Zellner. You can also call me Katie. So we'll keep it informal here. I'm going to go ahead and share my slides. So this will be hopefully popping up for you in just a moment. And going into presentation mode. Not yet. Just waiting to see if try the presentation mode one more time. Oh, okay. Okay, it looks like it doesn't want to go into presentation mode. So I'm going to try a different approach. Bear with me. Sorry for the technical difficulties here. And try sharing my whole screen. Okay. Thanks for bearing with me, everyone. As I said, my name is Katie Zellner, and I am a strategy manager here at Con Edison. I am dedicated to our light-duty EV infrastructure Make Ready program, which is really focused on light-duty vehicles. And I'm going to be presenting today a summary of the queue management best practices that we filed back in March as part of our straw proposal. So I wanted to start just with a little bit of background around how this straw proposal came to be. As was referenced earlier, the Public Service Commission in the midpoint order asked Con Edison to draw up a proposal that describes the efforts put forth in streamlining the Con Edison queue management system. And as we've heard, this will really be kind of a foundation for discussion among the participants in today's working group. So to give you a little bit of a preview of what we'll be summarizing here today, we have the 5 guiding principles here that you see at the top of the screen. And these guiding principles in our reflection on what has worked well in our managing our queue and achieving our getting our plugs installed and ready for customers. These 5 guiding principles underpinned all of those best practices that we identified. And they are speed to goal, flexibility and innovation, fair process, positive participant experience, and transparency. And as I said, each of these guiding principles are related to and support 4 categories of best practices or queue management methods. One category is operations measures, and you can really think about this as sort of your textbook industrial engineering best practices, batching, taking stock of the full portfolio of a participant's applications, cancellation policies, things like that. We also have a second category that focuses on participant informational tools, which are especially important for pre-application engagement. Next, we'll discuss best practices that are related to participant communication. And then lastly, we'll discuss methods for utility enterprise alignment. So before I dive into all of the summary of all of those best practices and a summary of what we filed, I did just want to ground us in sort of the background that led us to reflect on and synthesize these best practices. So you can see that we are about halfway through the program. As mentioned, this work came out of the midpoint review order, and our program achievement to date has really informed the best practices that you'll see today. So we are on our way. We've committed or installed about 52% of the plug target that we have in place for the end of 2025. So about 52% of that 21,371 target. These targets are the new targets that were authorized in the midpoint order in November of 2023. Our DCFC target increased by 6-fold in November to about 3,100 plugs, and we have committed or installed about 23% worth of that target, representing about 24 million of our budget. I think most folks know this, but L2 is level 2 and DCFC is direct current fast charging. So those are the two types of plugs here. And of course, all this achievement is alongside some select milestone or some important milestones for the program that you see here on the right-hand side of this slide. About a year after the program launched, we did experience a wait list at Con Edison for the first time. That was particularly among our participants that were interested in applying for enhanced incentives for plugs benefiting disadvantaged communities. We implemented a number of queue management strategies, which we'll hear about today, and also changed some of our incentive strategy and ultimately cleared that wait list. And then, of course, we had the midpoint order, which asked us to come together today for today's meeting, and also asked Con Edison in particular to file a summary of those queue management strategies. So one other piece of context that I wanted to walk everyone through today before we dive into the summary of our queue management best practices is just the project flow that a participant would go through when applying to receive Make Ready program funds, or as we call them at Con Edison, to participate in the Power Ready program. So the top half of this flow diagram really focuses on customer-led activities, and the bottom half really focuses on utility-led activities, or the different stages in the process that the utility moves through. And I just want to take a quick moment to look at the bottom third of the screen here, which has a legend. I've used an electric vehicle icon to represent the stages in the process that our EV program team led. Of course, we're collaborating with our service determination teams across the whole life cycle of this project timeline. But the EV icon represents the places where, no pun intended, the EV program team is more in the driver's seat. And then the sort of engineering graphic, maybe grid paper icon represents where the service determination teams are taking a lead. At Con Edison, those are our energy services and customer engineering groups. And we do have folks who sit in each of those teams who are primarily working on EV interconnection. And I did want to call out that a project that's applying a charging station site that's applying for Power Ready funds and going through the service determination process would be evaluated separately and in a different process than our distributed generation projects. In the case where there's a charging station that's going to have V2X capabilities, they would be evaluated both for the new load that they're requiring, and then separately, they would go through a distributed generation study for any electrons that they're putting back on the grid. So just a quick point of clarification there. So with those kind of definitions and caveats aside, I will take us through from left to right what the process is here. First, a participant will often engage in some of the pre-engagement services we offer Those include fleet advisory services and self-service tools like a hosting capacity map and the rate calculator that's on our website. From there, the participant or the customer will complete the application for incentive funding, and the EV program team will review that application, conduct a eligibility assessment, and ultimately determine if the customer or the participant is eligible for the Make Ready program for Power Ready at Con Edison. From there, we ask the customer to submit 5 key documents that are required for service determination to begin. And then our energy services and customer engineering teams start the review, go through the design and engineering process. At that point, the customer will receive a service ruling, and then we'll select the interconnection configuration that makes the most sense from them. And that will allow the EV program team to determine their initial incentive that's part of the Make Ready program incentives. That then allows customer side and utility side construction to begin, going all the way through energization. And then we're asking our participants in the program to submit a final checklist, permits, one-line diagrams that allow our team to go out and complete work verification. And then finally, the customer does have to submit the final customer side costs incurred, as well as identifiers for the new plugs installed that allow us to collect usage data. And that triggers the last several steps of the process, where we are processing and issuing payout, and then doing a closeout and starting reporting. So I know that was a lot of information to take in, but I do think it's kind of helpful to ground us in today's discussion. And what you'll see is that these best practices that we're going to speak about, these queue management methods, are sprinkled throughout the timeline here, but some are concentrated, some categories are more concentrated in different parts of the timeline. So for example, our operations measures are really concentrated more towards the beginning. They're most helpful in incentive eligibility review and in the work that helps a project get ready for handoff over to our service determination teams. Participant informational tools are most critical at the beginning of the project flow, often used by participants for planning their own business endeavors and for figuring out which sites are going to be most helpful for them to prioritize. Participant communication takes place throughout the project flow. And then, of course, utility enterprise alignment is most helpful right in the middle of the project flow when our teams are working together on service determination and interconnection. So that is the background context for all of the best practices and queue management strategies that we'll be reviewing today. As I mentioned, they are categorized in 4 different groups. The first is operations measures that we'll dig into. And these are really what you can think of as sort of the textbook examples, what you might have studied in school, with a long line of grocery shoppers winding around the grocery store, waiting in line to check out, except for we have EV charging stations that are waiting for their plugs to get constructed and energized. So with that in mind, I do want to take a moment to point out our legend. Again, we have our 2 icons, and then we also have a few places where there are green check marks. Those indicate items that are best practices and that we did identify through the first half of the program, but are actually at this point already implemented across the JU. So back to our kind of our grocery line image, we're going to jump into the first category of best practices around operations measures. And these speak to a few of the guiding principles that we mentioned at the beginning of the call: flexibility and innovation, fair process, and transparency. So our first recommendation here starts at the beginning of the application process when a participant submits its application for incentive review to determine if they're eligible to receive Make Ready program incentives. And we recommend determining what sequencing the EV program team will use to review those applications. we recommend thinking about the date of application, policy priorities, and other operational factors. And at Con Edison, the sequencing that we've landed on is a first come, first serve basis. Now, when you are experiencing a high volume of applications, we think that it's useful to batch projects for incentive review and for service determination. By batching, we mean grouping projects together such that they'll have the same milestones and the same deadlines. This can really help our EV program team not have to context switch and consider hundreds of different deadlines. Rather, they'll have one group of many projects that have the same deadlines and the same milestones. That also means that once that group of project or that batch of projects is ready for service determination and has all 5 of their required documents ready to go, that they will move into the service determination process at the same time, get handed off to our energy services team, and that will spark or trigger a review sprint. And this, of course, avoids the idea of baking one cookie at a time. Instead, you're baking many cookies at a time, mixing all of that batter together. And then finally, we do recommend, in the name of flexibility and innovation, to really think through where you can match a participant's pace as much as possible. So one place that we innovated at Con Edison is that we have a semi-automated screening tool, which we call Auto Rule, and that allows service adequate projects to go through an automated service determination process that saves our customer engineering group time. The projects are evaluated by an algorithm. And the second point here is that if a single participant is submitting multiple projects for interconnection, maybe there are 5 or 6 charging sites across New York City and Westchester that they are in the process of developing, we will work with that individual participant if they are submitting those projects at the same time and those projects are part of the same batch. Then we will work with that participant to identify which of the 5 or 6 projects, for example, are the most ready to go and should be prioritized. So typically we're identifying which are most shovel ready. All of this really speaks to a place where we've been able to innovate and where mandated timelines wouldn't allow for this type of innovation, but instead would really contribute more to a compliance mindset. So the next category of operations best practices that I want to speak to really focus on fair process and transparency again. They include pauses, cancellation, and then robust documentation. So in the category of pauses, we do allow projects to pause temporarily, particularly if a participant needs to secure financing or permitting or finalize an agreement with the host site. In the case where the host site is not the participant, maybe a developer is the participant. And this ability to temporarily pause a project allows us to avoid canceling the project, which can create some redundancy in work both for the participant and the utility once the project is reinitiated, because that would require a resubmission of documents and be sort of a redundancy of time spent and work done. Now, of course, a project can't stay on pause indefinitely, and that's why we have a cancellation policy. And this ensures that we're maintaining fairness and really only dedicating time and energy to projects that are prepared to move forward. So the cancellation policy would apply when a project has been on hold beyond a defined time frame, when the participant is not responsive beyond a defined time frame, or when the participant decides not to move forward. Also, in our program agreements, when we commit incentives to a participant, there's a published period of time beyond which, if there is no progress towards completion, the project can be canceled. And then finally, our last operation practice here, we recommend keeping transparent records. That helps everyone because it allows us to take a review, sort of a retrospective review of the program for future improvements. It also helps us share changes in project status with the participant and make sure that the participant and utility teams are working from the same information. So moving on to our second category of best practices, we're going to take a look at informational tools used for pre-engagement planning and project management. The first set here has to do with fleet advisory services and self-service tools, which contribute to faster movement through the project flow and a positive participant experience. We encourage participants to, we encourage utilities to promote their fleet advisory services to participants that are eligible. We think that this service really helps save time because it allows the participants to get educated about what's required to move through the Power Ready program before they get deep into project development. Our advisory services does include a site assessment, which is a preliminary review of grid capacity and can really help participants determine where they want to locate their EV charging site, and also can help prioritize projects in a scenario where a single participant has a portfolio of projects. And of course, this is going to be helpful in the participant deciding where and how they want to invest resources. Secondly, in the middle column here, we have a description of some self-services tools. First is just having a website that clearly lists the required documents that are needed to begin service determination. And those are listed on our website, as you can see from the screenshot on the right-hand side of the screen. Things like the site plan are required. We also have a hosting capacity map. This is something that's available at every member of the joint utilities across New York. And you can see an image of that for Con Edison on the right-hand side of the screen. And then we also have an EV charging calculator that can help a participant plan for the economics, the kind of whole version economics of their project. These are valuable self-serve resources and can also be very effective when reviewed with a member of the program team, like the business development team or the fleet advisory services team. Another set of pre-engagement and informational tools. One is the idea of application logic. So we encourage folks to think through what application logic can minimize errors in a participant's application. For example, you could prevent submission of an application either for incentives or application for service determination if the participant has not provided all of the required documents. So without this type of logic, you could end up sort of midway through the process where a project is stuck in a holding pattern because the participant realizes too late that they haven't readied the correct documents. And this type of application logic prevents that from happening. So we're not wasting any resources and we're maintaining really a positive experience and a level of fairness. Second, we recommend, and all the JU has already acted on this, the idea of developing a participant portal. So each JU member has a Make Ready program portal that shows participants the project history and incentive status. And then at Con Edison and Orange and Rockland, the portal also shows whether the utility or the participant is the owner of the current stage and what stage is coming up next in the process and what is required to move to that next stage. And as we've discussed, kind of hand in hand with that idea of offering as much transparency as possible, we recommend publishing a flow diagram similar to one that we've already shown at the beginning of this presentation that really lays out the full program process and indicates which steps are owned by the participant or customer versus which steps are owned by the utility. And there's a snapshot of this in our filing in the appendix as well. So I know there are a few questions that have come over chat. We have 2 more categories, and then we'll get to the overall Q&A period for the whole meeting. So moving us along to the participant communication category. This set of best practices, again, really applies to the whole flow of the project timeline and are particularly valuable for flexibility, participant experience, and transparency. So all of the JU members publish the remaining Make Ready program incentive funds on the JU website as part of a plug and budget tracker. And this gives participants a transparent view into the remaining incentives available and can help participants plan their business. Next, we also have participant webinars, and this is something that, again, all JU members are offering. It's especially important for new participants to the program as they get familiar with the process. And it's a scheduled time for participants to ask questions that they have. And a time when we'll share updates, changes to eligibility requirements, any process improvements, things of that nature. Next, we recommend wherever possible to highlight participant dependencies in communicating with both new and returning participants. So by this, I mean really explaining where and by when a participant must take action or provide information in order to move the service determination process or the incentive application process forward. And we do recommend setting deadlines that are customized by each utility. And we recommend including a defined and unpublished grace period for the participant in that deadline schedule. However, if you as a utility experience a waitlist environment, then you can remove that grace period to make sure that there is no there are as few projects as possible and sort of a waiting or a holding pattern gumming up the throughput that you need to improve. And then lastly here, we do recommend communicating an estimated timeline range for the utility upgrades. This, of course, is only applicable if there are utility upgrades required. And really want to emphasize to the participant that this is an estimate that is specific to an individual project, the specific scope studied in the service determination. And of course, we want to emphasize that any changes to the scope studied in that service determination would affect the deadline and extend the deadline. So in our last category of best practices here, we discuss methods for aligning across the utility enterprise. Again, the goal here is to really speak to speed to goal, flexibility and innovation, and transparency. So our recommendation is that that you define if, when, and how you would accept project scope changes that would affect service determination. So work across the departments in the utility to establish this policy and do make a plan, because any changes to the scope studied and service determination will require new engineering analysis. And that engineering analysis is a valuable resource that you want to dedicate strategically and thoughtfully so that every incoming customer gets their project moving through the process and moving through interconnection as quickly as possible. Second, this idea of defining when scope changes are permitted does allow for some flexibility. We know that things change in a project plan and construction, but we also we recommend developing a policy that discourages changes, again, for the sake of maintaining fairness to all participants and honoring those participants who come in ready to go without any changes to the scope of their project. So a few options you could consider. One, you could indicate to the participant that they'll have to complete a new service determination, but not incentive application, should they submit a change to scope of their what they want studied for their new project. or you could require that the participant submit a new incentive application and in addition, restart the service determination process. Second, for the sake of aligning across the utility, we recommend forecasting, that the EV team in particular forecast for internal teams and estimate the volume of cases expected at each stage of the pipeline. And this can really be helped by using that batching technique that we mentioned at the beginning of the presentation. So if you have worked collaboratively with energy services and customer engineering to determine what size of batch is appropriate, and in other words, how many projects per batch is recommended, then our service determination teams know that they can expect no more than that batch size to come through to their team each week. So there's kind of a ceiling of number of projects that those service determination teams might expect to flow into their queue every week. And that can help with staffing and planning and all sorts of things. And then finally, we wanted to acknowledge that positive performance incentives like EAMs drive innovation and alignment across the utility, as well as transparency. We know that EAMs drive towards excellence instead of driving towards a compliance mindset where we might all be working to meet a lowest common denominator. Instead, we're really working to achieve as best and as quickly as we can. In this case, we have an EAM that all of the JU members have for plug targets. So we're all working to achieve those plug targets by the end of 2025. And then Con Edison also has an EV interconnection EAM. EAMs are filed publicly, and performance against them are also public information. So with that, I just have a few definitions that if anyone needs to see them are available. And we can change over to Lisa to tell us what's next on the agenda and how we might want to handle questions.
Thanks, Katie. I'm just wondering if it might be best to address the questions that were specifically asked of you prior to continuing with what all the homework assignments are going to be.
Sure. I think that's a good idea.
Okay, and can you see them in chat, or do you need us to read them out to you?
I can see them in chat.
Okay.
Okay, cool. I'm going to scroll back up to the top. So I'm at where Lindsay added the contact information. Okay, so William asked, are there prescribed time limits for each of the stages listed on slide 4? Let's see. Sorry, the chat is updating as we go. Okay, so overall, we try to work within the customer's scope of what they need so that we can match their timeline and needs as much as possible. And I think we talked about some of the flexibility that we offer on slide 9. And there are deadlines for some, but not all stages, so that we don't end up in a stagnant queue situation. That's where things like the cancellation policy also comes in, because we don't want to have any stagnancy, if that's a word. William, does that answer your question there? Any follow-ups?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. Thanks, Katie. Yeah, I was particularly interested in if you're trying to operate similarly to the SIR, where there actually are bands of time that are allocated for each of the steps. And so it sounds like that's not the case yet. You have certain deadlines, but there aren't bands of time yet created.
That's correct. There's no like chess clock type situation. Yep.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And I have a number of other questions, but please take them sequentially for the other people too.
Okay, that sounds good. Thank you. Okay, and Williams from NY Best. Okay. Alex Fulcott asked, Katie, can you clarify how the participant portal interacts with utilities' existing systems? how the portal interacts and enables seamless interaction across Con Ed Project Center and other requests to the Con Ed Energy Services team, especially if V2X or other DERs might need to be referenced and applied separately. And Alex is from 9.energy. So we use Salesforce as our customer resource resource management system to intake applications, and then that does trigger project creation in our central internal system that manages projects. My understanding is that for a V2X project, there would be an entirely different study that would be done and an entirely different project that would be triggered in our central management system, because we're really then evaluating whether and how electrons would be put back on the grid. So I have some colleagues in the room who are going to add a point there.
Hi, everyone. This is Cliff Barada from Con Edison. I'll just add to what Katie said, because there are a few other questions related to V2G or EVSE paired with energy storage that to date, that has been a very, very small minority of the projects that have applied, at least for Con Edison. I believe in our discussions with the other utilities, that is true statewide as well. And so that process of applying separately has actually allowed for a lot of flexibility, as Katie mentioned. But it is certainly something to think about as we go forward, given the SIR process and the EV process. But just wanted to emphasize that the large majority of what constitutes our queue and what we are seeing as EV stations being installed in the state are unidirectional power flow and without DERs so far.
So Alex, add to the chat if we haven't answered that fully, and we can revisit as we move through these. Our next question is from Sejal Shah, the Joint Office of Energy and Transportation. How are EVSEs that are not for fleet use addressed in this flow? How would public charging be considered in this approach? This varies. They would go through the same incentive application process. They would be reviewed in the same queue for incentive eligibility, and they would go through the same service determination process. The policy, it varies a bit from utility to utility on whether some of those large public charging sites are making use of the fleet advisory services, and the budgets dedicated to those fleet advisory services are determined in the midpoint order and are determined as a percentage of the incentive budget. So the bigger incentive budgets have more sort of manpower to dedicate it to those advisory services. And then let's see, we have another question here from Richard sorry, Richard, I'm not going to attempt your last name. Sturdybunt from NY Best. How do you plan to streamline the process for pre-engagement and planning surrounding V2G interconnections regarding the separate load and distributed generation studies? There is a concern that the difference in timing between load and EV connection study queues will lead to planning issues or late denial of the project. And I think there that, as Cliff, my colleague, just mentioned, we have a very small number of projects that are also being sent through the DER queue and are considered V2X. So we will have to innovate and keep that concern top of mind as we have more projects that are considered V2X. I also don't have to be the only one to answer these questions. But so if anyone else who works on the JU wants to jump in, please do. Okay, so we have another question here from Bill Acker. Katie, would you please discuss, just scroll down. Please discuss how you plan to treat applications where EVSE is coupled with energy storage. How do you plan to treat EVSE in bidirectional V to G? Okay, did I get all of that? I think I did. So I think that's a similar question, a similar answer where we, we're really kind of at the early stages of determining how best we're going to accommodate the V to X applications. It's been a very small portion. So that's something that we'll continue to innovate around, and we're confident based on how we've innovated so far that that we'll be able to accommodate as that case study really becomes more prominent. I'm just making sure that there's nothing that I'm missing here.
Katie, there was one further up that I had on the queues being posted publicly.
Okay, got it. Oh, Bill, I just want to, before I turn to that question, I just wanted to add that just to make sure that it's crystal clear, an EVSE that has energy storage would have to go through the SIR. And if they want to energize the EVSE first, they can, but the full site is governed by the SIR. So just again, to reemphasize, the EVSE part of the application currently is not going through SIR and has flexibility to move more quickly. And so it's really the SIR study of the battery or the storage component that is sort of moving at the predefined timelines. So yeah, go ahead.
So that's sort of what I was trying to get at. I certainly understand that they would have to go through the SIR process. So what I was trying to tease out was whether, if you have an EVSE with an energy storage resource together, and you're putting them behind the same meter, would you actually then be studying the EVSE separately in your process you're talking about here, and then having an SIR for the energy storage, or would the combined piece go through the SIR kind of separate from your process?
We would work with the participant to figure out the right sequencing and flow, and make sure that we're doing our best to accommodate their timeline. But the storage part, of course, has to adhere to the SIR process.
Right. Yeah, I think the reason why we think this is important is that in a lot of cases, the combining actually reduces the load on the grid, and so studying them separately, the whole purpose of putting the battery with the EVSE is to mitigate some of the grid effects of the EVSE, and so if we bifurcate the study process, it defeats the purpose of that, and so and we realize that that's mitigated by the fact that you want to move the EVSE part along quickly, and so I think there's some work this group can do on figuring out how to harmonize that.
Okay, thanks. We also had a question, Bill Acker's question, Katie, are the queues publicly posted? Are pause projects considered in the engineering study for any later project? Pause projects considered in the engineering study for any later project, i.e. stay ahead of the queue. This might be more important in harmonizing the queues with any other resources. So overall queues and overall plug achievement are publicly posted on the JU website, and those are split out by incentive tier. So public projects are separated from private projects, and L2 are separated from DCFC. for pause projects, if a participant wants to resume a pause project, they can pick up where they left off. And, you know, they'll pick up wherever in the timeline they last stopped. And that, you know, if the engineering study was completed, then that wouldn't be affected. But there is no public posting for the, you know, whole wider audience to see which projects are on hold. If we are in a waitlist environment, though, waitlists are the update on where the waitlist is in terms of number of items in queue, so to speak, would be would be published. Okay, just going back to the chat here.
Katie, we have a Cole Germain raised his hand to ask a question.
Oh, okay, great.
Yeah, thanks, Katie. This is Cole Germain from Environmental Defense Fund. So 2 questions that are kind of related here. The first one is, in the order of operations that you laid out, that the customer responsibilities and utility responsibilities, is that, how does that apply, if it applies at all, to a project that may be an EV project, but you know from the beginning is not eligible for incentives? Do all EV projects go through Power Ready? Is it only those projects getting incentives? Or if you have like a site where a customer is installing chargers, but also using upgraded or new service for non-EV uses on the site, how does that go through that order of operations?
So the project that's not receiving Power Ready incentives can engage with our pre-engagement services, including advisory services and the self-service tools, but they wouldn't have to go through the incentive eligibility review. So they would just basically skip to the stage of the flow where they're submitting those required documents and beginning the service determination review.
Okay, got it. All right. And then the second part of it is where you talked about batching projects. Do those batches only look at projects that are, part of the Power Ready program, or do you also expand it to look at other relevant projects as well? I'm thinking of, a situation where you may have an area where you have a bunch of projects that are part of the Power Ready program, but also other service requests for, building electrification or other, just other upgrades requesting service, that it may be useful for the service determination group to be looking at all of those together. So do you look at those beyond just EV projects?
So not beyond it. Yeah, the batching that I referenced is really in reference to EV projects only, and sort of by default really touches Power Ready, just because there are very few EV projects that are submitted outside of Power Ready without going through the incentive review process. So at this point, it really is kind of one and the same. And batching could be useful in the future with outside of Power Ready for EV projects, but at this point, there are just so few projects that are outside of Power Ready that it's almost synonymous.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Katie, you had another raised hand from Moshe Cohen.
Okay. Hi, Moshe.
Hey, how you doing? Thank you for this, and it's great to talk to you guys today. I want to expound a little bit on the things that have come up in terms of the service determination, V2G, and the relationship between these different groups. I mean, what we've been finding that I think is very promising is that there's a challenge where service determination is sort of treated somewhat in isolation from the technologies that are going to be connected and how they're going to be used. And so rather than thinking kind of independently and a first come, first serve about interconnections without sort of scoring them, I'm wondering if there's any pathway to thinking about service determination where there's much more active and bidirectional flow of power from the EVs to the systems, And I understand this comment about there not being a lot of V to X right now. That's because there's new standards that I don't know if any products on the market apply to right now. And you guys are going to have to decide, like, are you updating to the new UL standards? But this very much does impact, as like a company who's building these products and going through these certifications. It really impacts like how we prioritize things and how we think about them. And so my question is like, how do we kind of connect these processes a little bit better? So for example, we go into sites that tell us that there's no power, and we're able to actually find a ton of power, sometimes free power, but because the evaluations are not taking into account the way a utility would, when the power is being used, how is, for example, like auxiliary or solar being used, and how is it connected, the ability to sort of co-locate under similar totalizers, and also the ability to augment existing service limits with parked EVs with sort of like upcoming very high throughput V2G. And so my question is just kind of like, how do we connect these two processes of sort of trying to solve for better interconnections, trying to think about kind of the future of the grid, but also, you know, us in the private sector that are literally building things in order to do this, being able to have some sense of like, what does this timeline look like? How do we evaluate sites, et cetera?
So Katie, I can take that if you'd like. So this is exactly, everything that was discussed here is exactly what this working group is going to discuss as we move forward with it. So I think, Katie, did you, so that's the purpose of this group, and I'm just going to pull up the rest of our slides to discuss our next step, so that all this information that was just discussed will be addressed. So let me, our next steps for this group. In presentation mode, hold on 1 second, I'm just pulling it up. Can people see my screen?
We can see your screen. You're not in presentation mode yet,
Okay.
but while you're doing that, Lisa, I can just, you know, speak. It sounds like we have a group that's very interested in V2X, and like that's,
Yep.
you know, definitely where we see a lot of future technology and development going, which is exciting. I did just want to clarify that the applications for the sort of putting power back on the grid and the add and load are separate, but then the project itself is studied together. So, and we would work closely with the customer to determine the sequence that they wanted to move at. So, you know, if it was important to do the EV study first, we could do the EV study first. And, you know, the limiting factor is that anything that's sort of in the DER camp has to follow the SIR process.
Yeah,
So
I'm asking if they could be looked at together, I guess is the question, right? Like, because like a lot of the things you're saying are
we can,
very
yeah.
descriptive, like this is how our process works. And some of the things kind of we're bringing up is maybe these are some ways to consider making it work a little bit better given kind of like new technology that's coming out.
They can and they are. It's just we're noting that there are separate sort of governance guidance for the two applications, because, you know, they're asking two different things of the grid, if you will. And we do have a V2G pilot ongoing in Westchester that's focused on school buses. So as Lisa was saying, you know, we're bringing lots of experience and learnings, and want to make sure that we're contributing those learnings to this group. Sorry. Oh, the pilot. Oh, the pass. Oh, it's a pass pilot. Excuse me, I misspoke. Okay, Lisa, I think you're in presentation mode now.
Okay, thank you so much for that, Katie. I appreciate it. So we're going to go into our next steps on, this is the first meeting of this working group. We'll probably have many more because, as you can tell, we have lots of things that we want to work together on. So while we're heading to the end of this first meeting, the next steps for this group, and there's going to be probably a lot of homework, we'll be editing this straw proposal that Con Ed had submitted. And the straw proposal can be found again on DMN under case number 18E0138 and on the EVIIWG webpage. So any comments and edits that you want made to the straw proposal, you can email to me, Lisa Rossi, at lisa.rossi@dps.ny.gov or at evse@dps.ny.gov. by the next meeting, which is currently scheduled for May 8th. Staff will incorporate the edits into the straw proposal for discussion at the third meeting, which is planned for June 7th, tentatively planned for June 7th. I can't, whoops. Sorry. One second, my slide thing.
Yeah, I think we lost the screen, Lisa.
Yeah, we're having a little bit of a technical. I think we're getting it back. Sorry about that. Was that a dramatic? That was the cliffhanger.
Yes, exactly.
Do I have it now? Okay, we can see it. Oh, additionally, including the edits, can people still see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, sorry about that.
No
So,
problem.
additionally, after, you can send the edits to me. The working group should also provide, as we were discussing today, any issues and barriers encountered when interconnecting the EVs. And I can't move forward. And then we have a couple of questions for the group to consider for future EV meetings and things to consider to put into the amended straw proposal. And that would be suggestions on the format and organization of the EVIIWG, any ideas from other jurisdictions, and should the interconnection process for EVs be separate from or added as a modification to the current standard interconnection requirements process for the distributed energy resources? And how should changes in EV technology and policy be incorporated into the EV-specific interconnection process? And are there any billing and crediting issues that we might anticipate? And are there any other considerations that should be taken into account? So a lot of homework for this group. I think the first thing we should tackle is, the edits that can be sent to me and, the list of any other issues that this group wants to address. Again, everything's going to be posted on the EVIIWG web page that I think Lindsay sent into the chat. And does anybody have any questions on how this process will work for us right now?
I have a question, maybe just a point of clarification. This is Joe Silver from 9DOT. Is this being integrated at all with the medium heavy duty proceeding, or are these being treated as separate workflows?
Right now, they're separate workloads for the EV, and they're intermeshed. So they'll likely be together. We'll be doing similar things for both. And then I think there was a question from Joe Fletcher.
Yeah, I can read it to you, Lisa, if you want.
Okay.
Dan
I have it.
Fletcher.
I actually have it right now. With the need to validate VGI by discharging during the evening peak periods, is it of interest to advance residential EV interconnection? UL 9741 provides for this duty cycle. Anything you can share on this sort of service, including via a V2H initial step, would be much appreciated. Dan, can you unmute yourself and give some more context to what you're trying to ask us?
Yeah, sure thing. So UL 9741 allows for a home DC charger to connect and discharge the EV. So the EV can be discharged into the home, and then, can also be discharged through interconnection to the grid. So with 80 to 90% of vehicle charging happening in the residential setting, and also the need to discharge the vehicle really happening to replace solar power production in the peak period. And that pathway is available technically and available with the certification authority. So it may be something that can be advanced. The part about using V2H as an initial step is if you sort of, today have V1G, where you refrain from charging during the most difficult periods for congestion, and then V2H, where you can contain the discharge of the vehicle to home and load only and not export. And then, the full case of interconnection with V2G with discharge and export to the network. That's a little color on the question. I didn't mean to create a big quiet period there.
No, that's fine. Thank you so much for your comment. I think if this is something that we can take off online and learn a little bit more about, I think. So I think that's the way to do it. Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
And I think, Lisa, overall, if there are electrons being put back on the grid, it is right now goes through the SIR process. I do just want to underscore, in case it wasn't clear in my answers earlier, that if in the case where an EV charger is co-located with battery or storage, and it's, touching the interconnection process that we reviewed today, then we do study those two flows together and consider how the storage can support the EV load and address any site-specific limitations. But the governance structures of governing, a study of load versus a study of putting electrons back on the grid are different, because there's no SIR process for EVSE.
Okay, we don't see any other questions right now, so I would just really like to thank everyone for participating in this first EVI IWG. Our next meetings are currently scheduled for May 8th and June 7th, and we, are really looking forward to addressing the EV interconnection process with everybody on this call and in this working group. And I think that's, unless anybody has anything else, we are all set for today. And, check the web page and let me know, send me comments and answers to the questions and edits to the STRUT proposal. Does anybody have anything else? Katie, thank you so much for your presentation.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.